of the world. The attraction of these humans.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Crystal.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All right. So good evening. It's 6 p.m. according to my time. So, and my name is Marina Julian Joseph. I am the Acting Education Officer for District 1. And I'll be your host for this evening's meeting. I want to make an excuse for Mrs. Innocent, the District Education Officer for District 2, who is out on some special leave. So we have to keep her in our prayers as we continue with this session. Okay, I think Julia, your mic is on. Okay, so let me just, I have to do the welcome and the prayer. So we're going to start with prayer. So let me pray. And before I do so, I would like participants of District 1, District 2, parents, and so on. Some of you are signing in with the name of your phone. We would like that you put a name so we can refer to you by in the event that you ask a question or something and we want to know who we should refer to. So you can change your iPhones and some of the other devices that you have. Just put your name or a name that we can refer to you by. Thank you so much. Okay, let us pray. Invite the presence of the Lord into this consultation. Heavenly Father, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, O Lord, for us to deliberate on matters pertaining to our students, Lord.
If anything, I'll call them.
Sorry about that. Make sure your phones your mics are off while we pray. I know it's not your fault, so I'll start again. Heavenly Father, I would like to thank you for this evening. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity for us to deliberate matters pertaining to our special students. I pray that you open our minds, give us the courage, the boldness to understand what is being explained to us, and that we'll get enough clarification so that we'll be able to help our students. Be with the facilitators in a special way that give them the courage also, give them the clarification to assist the educators, the parents, and the community members, the principals who are here, so that we can better our education system. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, so
well, the other
Excuse me, Miss Joseph, but your mic is muted.
sorry, did you hear the prayer? What happened here?
We heard
It
your
got
prayer,
muted
but you
after the
ended.
mic.
Oh, okay, sorry. So I'll do the welcome. Sorry about that. Okay, so good evening, everyone. And I said welcome, a special welcome to the facilitators, Dr. Spencer Hernandez and Dr. Edward Kern, and all principals, teachers, parents, community members, all educators, everyone, special welcome to you. And it is indeed a pleasure to have you here this evening for this very important consultation on special needs education policy and strategy. This is the first of many consultations, and feel free to ask as many questions as possible to get all doubts clarified. It is a pleasure to know that actions are being taken to address the needs of our differently able individuals among us. In the past, it was very difficult in our education system to cater or to attend to these special students. And knowing that a policy is being put in place speaks volume for the growth that is taking place in our education system. So District 1 and 2 educators, parents, and community members at large, welcome to this consultation. Feel free to participate for this consultation. Feel free to participate in this consultation for our clarification and betterment. Okay, thank you very much. At this point, I would like to refer you to the facilitators and Miss Edith Emmanuel. Welcome, everyone. So let me just refer you to the facilitators and Miss Emmanuel. Miss Emmanuel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mistress Julian Joseph. Good evening, everyone. I would, of course, like to defer to Dr. Dion Edwards-Kerr, who will commence this proceeding. But of course, we would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for availing yourselves this evening. This is a matter of national importance as the Ministry of Education pursues the agenda of inclusion. If we are to include every child in the instructional delivery or in learning within a school environment, it is important that the relevant policies be put in place, the relevant legislation will also be put in place. And so this is really a very important meeting to really get the public's opinion, have the national or have everyone within our nation really involved in this discussion so that the final product produced will be in the interest of all stakeholders. So once again, thank you for availing yourselves at this time for this sacrifice. I know it's a little late, but we had to try to allow for time for as many participants to be available to participate given differences in work schedules. But thank you very much for availing yourselves. And without further ado, I pass on to Dr. Dion Edwards-Kerr and her team. Thank you, everyone.
Liam, come.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay, I'm Dion Edwards-Kerr, part of the team that has put together this policy. I am here in Kingston, Jamaica at University of the West Indies. My colleague, Joan Spencer Hernandez, is also online. And our colleague in St. Lucia, Kathy Depredine, is also online. Together this evening, we are going to try our very best to break down what the special education needs policy is about. And hopefully we are hoping that you will have some questions that you can ask that will help to maybe clarify some things for us, give us some insight, and add your comments. Please be as candid as possible and as open as possible to making your points. There is nothing that is off the table. Whatever you feel or you look at and you figure, well, that won't work or that will work, then we are seeking your guidance in this respect. Okay. So in terms of starting, I'm just going to ask Dr. Hernandez to go ahead and introduce herself, and Kathy, who is somewhere here, to also introduce herself.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Joan Spencer Hernandez,
special educator by training. I'm a senior lecturer and at the University of the West Indies Mona campus, and also the manager of the Joint Board of Teacher Education. And we have been in this team for quite a while, working to ensure that the best is delivered for our colleagues in St. Lucia. I hope that you will share with us and be very open and frank, as Dion has asked. Thank you.
I was a little sorry because I had a
Hi.
Kathy, are you on?
Yes, yes, I am. Good evening, everyone. I am Kathy Depredine. I am attached to the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. I function as a teacher educator, educational research consultant, and I'm very, very passionate about what's happening here this evening. And I look forward to, as was said earlier, your very candid contribution and comments on what will be presented. Doc?
Okay. So we're going to start out just providing an outline. In terms of where we're going this afternoon. So far, I must say that we have made similar presentations to the minister and the senior executives of the Ministry of Education, as well as to other public bodies and private sector bodies.
No, I'm not sharing anything. No?
Hello?
I don't think this is watching. Just a wish to call on. Oh, because I know you were talking and then I stopped hearing first.
I think, Charles, you don't have to. You go if you're lab.
Right, I'm sorry about that. Apologies. Okay, so the outline of the presentation is really in two major parts. First, the background section of the presentation, and then a focus on policy and the strategic goals. And this is where we really want to engage with the public, with persons, especially persons who have had experiences in the system in terms of what is likely to help the system work better for our children and young people. So the background really focuses on what the objectives are. What are the objectives for this project that we've been working on since January 2023. So this is just a little bit over a year. Now, the general objective for the project is based on the need to transform the education system, to make it responsive to the needs of all learners. That is every child who is part of the education system, and to ensure that the education system, what they get in schools, both from primary school to high school, that what they get is actually aligned with the requirements of the 21st century labor market system. So specifically, we were to prepare a gender-sensitive policy and strategy for the government of St. Lucia that would provide the best options, the best alternatives for educating children with special education needs. And it's important, I just kind of stick a pin right here just to say that by gender-sensitive, the UNESCO spectrum defines gender sensitive as an awareness that gender plays a part in how a policy is developed. And in terms of special education needs, we're talking about the spectrum. This really refers to the spectrum of needs of all learners, from those who are absolutely brilliant to those who have more profound needs in the system. So it's a spectrum of needs that we're talking about, from the gifted and talented to those who have additional needs or complex needs and require additional attention. Now, the government's aim is to improve the quality of education overall and to ensure that there are pathways for all children who are participating in the education system. But what is the policy issue? The real issue here is that St. Lucia has actually recognized that there are barriers to learning in the primary and the secondary schools system, and that these stem from factors that include impairments, psychosocial issues, differences in abilities, life experiences, deprivation, negative attitudes, an inflexible curriculum, access to the curriculum, access to safe environments, policies and legislation, the attitudes and outputs from education managers and teachers, and the lack of skills or inappropriate skills. And this is undergirded by the recognition that all children need educational support, regardless of where they are, that there are multiple issues, not just, we very often when we think of special education needs, we think of children who are quote unquote disabled, but that's not what we're clearly here. The range of factors that we're talking about is not just about disability. We're talking about all the needs that would put a child at risk and undermine their ability to achieve in the education system. Now, the approach that we took, and many of you there may be people in this meeting who were part of those consultations where we interviewed persons about their experiences. So 2 things, we conducted 35 meetings, consultative meetings, including meetings across all the districts, meetings with the unions, meeting with teachers, meetings with students, meetings with persons from other ministries, meetings with parents. Parents were an important part and remain an important part of this work. We also conducted a desk review of the existing legislation, the Education Act, the draft Special Education Needs Policy, and importantly, the statistical analysis that tells us what are the outcomes from the school system over a number of years. And we use this data to provide the kind of policy analysis that would identify where the gaps are. So what generally did stakeholders have to say? The stakeholders agreed that the existing legislation, that the Education Act did not provide sufficient coverage for a coordinated system of special education for the subsector to be healthy enough to deliver services to students. And so they identified several gaps. These gaps included qualified personnel to conduct clinical assessment, appropriate interventions, qualified special education, long wait times for assessments, long wait times for intervention, teaching and learning resources in the classroom, for example, the need for assistive technology and technology that would allow those children who are impaired, visually impaired, hearing impaired, and visually impaired to have access to what's happening in the classroom, appropriate placement options. So one of the key placement options was special schools. And we'll talk about that later in terms of the likelihood that there are children in our special schools that might not belong in a special schools. Okay. Accessible school plans, so the need for ramps and rails and those things that will allow children in wheelchair and children with any kind of mobility issues to access the schools. It was also highlighted that at the secondary school system, the special education delivery of service was particularly sparse, particularly gaps in the curriculum, gaps in instruction for children with SEND, gaps in the referral and the assessment, gaps in skills training and approaches to providing services for the transition from school to work. So in terms of the desk review, we were able to see over a period of years what the outcomes look like from the education system. And some of the things that we were able to identify was the high percentage rate of repetition in the primary school level at grades K, 1 and 2, and 1 and 3, and at form 4 and 5. And while it is not specifically disability or any kind of cognitive issue that would undermine these children's outcome, as I outlined before, there are a range of factors, including a range of disadvantages that would actually keep these children back and enable them to be in the position they're in. So we identified that the risk of school failure started or was evident from as early as MST2, and that if there wasn't sufficient remediation over the period of the school years up to grade 6, then that carries on into the secondary school system. We saw that the Education Act, as it was the 2005 Act, which is the one we had to review, was not aligned with the various conventions, UNESCO conventions, UN conventions that the St. Lucia had been signatory to, that actually require the need to ensure that all persons are included in the education system. In addition, the overall framework for special education needs was missing the cooperation, collaboration, and coordination between different ministries. The Ministry of Education by itself is not able to carry all the issues related to the needs of children. And so what was missing is a kind of an intersectoral framework to coordinate those services. Importantly, when it came to the special education unit in the Ministry of Education, the absolute need for a multidisciplinary team. And by multidisciplinary, I mean a clinical psychologist, occupational therapist, physiotherapist, speech and language pathologist, and other special educators that would support, provide, and not just conduct assessment, but provide services for children. So one of those are the areas we focused on. We focused on the areas that emerged from the conversations with the stakeholders and from the desk review. I am going to pause here and take any questions and answers at this point in time. So the floor is actually open for anyone who would like to ask any question about what I've presented so far. This is what we call the preface of the policy. The meat of it will be undertaken by my colleagues, Joan and Kathy, in a little bit. So any questions at this point in time? Any comments? We welcome any comments.
Hello?
Yes, hi.
Good evening.
Yes. Yes, Julia.
I just like to make a brief comment.
Yes, please.
Yes, speaking on behalf of my son. He has a speech, should I say impairment? Yes, speech impairment. He was in grade K, and he has a little lips when he talks. He wouldn't be able to pronounce certain words because of his speech impediment. And well, he did fairly well at end of term. I think he got about 80% thereabouts. And his teacher wanted to keep him back in kindergarten. She wanted to keep him back in kindergarten because of the speech impediment. And I told her, I don't think that's wise, because when it comes to everything like alphabets and, grammar usage and all of that, he knows all his work, he knows his alphabets, he knows his words and all of that. It's just that he can't speak as clearly as the other kids because of the speech impediment. So it's not a matter of he being intellectually back. It's just that he has that little speech problem. So I tell her, I think it's wise that he goes up and probably get some help, professional help with speaking, where she spoke to the principal of the school and he was referred to a speech therapist, which I brought him to, and I find he has gotten much better.
Okay.
So I think sometimes, yeah.
Go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead.
So like I was saying, I think it's not a matter of sometimes the child being like not advanced as maybe his or her peers. It's just that sometimes they have a little issue and it can be rectified. Like say looking for different measures before leaving them back and making them, because what if the child, has done so well and believes like I'm capable as my other peers, and then you were to leave that child back, then the child will start to question themselves and think, I'm not up to my friend's level, but I'm seeing I'm doing sometimes at the same level or doing better. It's just that I can't pronounce certain things or say it like my friends, so it's just a matter of getting the help that they need.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, these are some of the things that we had to look at when we talk about inclusion and who are the children who will require help at a given point in time. So you recognized, rightfully so, that your son's challenge was really about a speech, a delay in his speech, but this was not impairing his academic performance. So with help to pronounce his words and so on, he's quite fine. So in this in our proposed policy, of course, parents will have the right to, like you do now actually, to appeal a decision, and to your voice must also be heard before decisions. In addition to that, one would have had to have a speech language pathologist assess the child to say, okay, this is a kind of problem he has, and we work with the child. But once his academic performance is where it should be, then he can move on, I'm happy you made such a decision. But we have to protect the rights of the children and parents, and also the ministry and others, to ensure that the right decision is made for each child.
Yes, that's true. Okay. Thank you. You're welcome.
We have another question from Irvin Smith. You can go ahead.
Good day. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Not so much a question as a comment. I'm a special education teacher. I just wanted to applaud you guys, and I'm happy to see the thrust that is going on in terms of looking at policy and special education, because there are many issues and challenges, like you rightfully said, like building policies and to put ramps in schools, and it's amazing how some parents can get through the referral process in a matter of a few months. And there are others who you feel like your hand is tied and they go through the entire school system over years, and you cannot move the referral process. So I think policy would go a long way to really make the job of a special education teacher less frustrating, and get the resources and personnel that is needed. Actually, like today, some schools don't have a special education teacher, and with inclusivity and all the other things that we are embracing, these things are becoming even more glaring. So kudos to you all, and I look forward to hear all the wonderful things that are in the pipeline.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we are going to go into the second phase, and my colleagues Kathy and Joan will take over from here. Joan, go ahead, please.
Okay. Dion, can you ask permission for us to record today's session?
I believe the session is being recorded.
I just sent a message to you to allow it to be recorded. It wasn't being recorded.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Good evening. Okay, I'm going to walk you through some of the principles. Sorry, not the principles. May I go to the next slide? That would have happened before. Do I have sharing facility? Do I have? Yeah, okay. So we're going to go through the overall policy goal and to look at some of the related policy components, which there are 6 of them. So we want overall for inclusion to be systemic within the system, and learners with special education needs and disabilities have access to high quality, appropriate education to meet their individual needs. So what do we mean by special education needs and disabilities? Now, there are some children who are vulnerable by virtue of the fact that their first language might not be English. They may live in deep rural areas where they have no access to or limited access to services. They may have attendance problems, and which is what is causing their underachievement. They may be ill, have illnesses that keep them away from school a lot. So they aren't truly what we would call persons with disabilities, but they are performing just like that. In addition to that, a child who may be gifted and talented would be considered one who needs special education because that child does not really deserve to be within to be every day doing the things that is expected of the grade level when that child is way advanced. So a special program may be developed for such a child. In the same way, we want to bring the others up from wherever they're performing. So it's about the individual child. So it's special education needs and disabilities. So the disabilities would be roughly the 14 categories that you may very well be aware of. Visually impaired, hearing impaired, physically impaired, those children who may need to be in a wheelchair or, have other kinds of physical disabilities. There are those who may have a learning disability. There are those who may be autistic and so on. The different slow learners. We'll get into that. So there are roughly about 14 categories of disabilities. And then we have quite a few, most of the children actually who may be underachieving would have special education needs, not necessarily because they have a disability, but because they are performing significantly behind their grade and age equivalent peers. So at the center of this, we have access to quality inclusive education. It does not mean that inclusive education gets rid of special schools, because then we have to make sure that we have a range of placement of options, and each option is designed for the child. Once we have the assessment results, maybe this child cannot fit into a full-time general education school, but may very well need to be in a special school, or maybe a special class in a general education school, or maybe just pulled out for special attention in a resource room and so on. So there are different placement options. So what are these 6 policy components? One has to do with the organizational structures. What structures do we need to put in place to ensure that their needs are met at the school level, at the ministry level, at the home and community levels, and so on? Then we need to know what infrastructural provisions and support mechanisms are necessary to make this work. Do we need to put in ramps? Do we need to ensure that the environment is safe for any child who has a disability, right? And then we have to think about the human resource provisions. Do we have qualified special educators? Dion Edwards, the screen just went. Okay, do we have qualified special educators? Speech and language pathologists. We just heard about a child who had some speech problems very early in the day, right? Young child, and so on. What do we need to make this work in terms of qualified human resource personnel? And then we need to know what curricular adaptations and modifications are necessary to have access to quality inclusive education. The curriculum is typically designed for the average learner. What about those who are falling behind or those who may be way ahead? How do we meet their individual needs? Then, of course, our stakeholders, how do we get them involved? Our local persons who may be belonging to advocacy groups, you have the Blind Welfare Association and so on. What about our private sector? What about our non-governmental organizations? How do we get stakeholders involved? Parents, community members, and so on. And then primarily now, well, everything adds up. It's a puzzle that we're putting the pieces together. How do we identify children who may have special education needs and disabilities? And what kind of intervention programs do they need? And where do we place them? So we're going to go through each and spend a few minutes on it, and then we'll ask for questions. Dion?
At this point, persons can also ask questions, or we can move on if there are no questions.
Let me explain a little bit further, and then we can go to the questions.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, cool. Okay, so the first one we're looking at is identification, intervention, and placement. Now, the policy surrounding that has to, we claim, all learners with special education needs and disabilities will have access to quality, appropriate, inclusive education with free and compulsory primary and secondary education in their communities with their peers, unless it is clearly demonstrated that the child's educational, welfare, and social needs may not be adequately met in a general education classroom. What are we saying here? The general population of learners are in free and compulsory primary and secondary education at this time. So we're saying this must be afforded to everyone, every single learner, regardless of what your disability or your special needs might be. Now, we're saying as much as is possible, you should be educated within your community, with your peers, unless that's not the most appropriate accommodation for you. And so you need to be in a special school or a special class, as we had mentioned before. Now, to make this identification, intervention, and placement policy work, we have to have an early identification system. So as early as the disability or special education needs present itself, which we, may be as early as birth. Some children from birth, we know that they will have special education needs and disabilities. There may be those who we only pick it up in high school. And it may be that they've gone ahead in high school. Something happened in high school, maybe some traumatic event or an accident or something that is causing this same child to not perform at the level the child used to perform. And that's the earliest time that this is presented itself. We must have a system in place to deal with it as early as we identify the problem. We also have to look at how do we assess them? What are the instruments that we're using? Are they culturally relevant and standardized on your population or, generally speaking, children in the region? We may very well be calling some children intellectually challenged, and it's because the test is biased against our setting. So we have to be very careful and look at all the items to ensure that they are culturally relevant and that they are not discriminating against our children. We need to look at placement options from the least restrictive to the most enabling environment, all the way up to, and these may include, as I said, general education setting. And I'll share with you now that most of the children who may have special education needs and disabilities are actually in our general education classroom. We have limited space in places such as where we might accommodate children with hearing impairment, children who are visually impaired, or those who may be multiply disabled and therefore are in special schools and so on. But most of the children are already in general ed, and most of them, unfortunately, are without services. So we need to fix that. We want to look at the types of intervention programs that we're developing for these children and to ensure that these programs are meeting their needs. We want to look at transition across phases and levels of education. We know when you're moving from grade 3 to grade 4 that the lower school, which is kindergarten to 3, there is a transition period into the upper school, 4, 5, and 6. And then there's a huge transition process from primary to secondary, and from secondary to tertiary or to world of work or further training. Then we need to look at our referral systems. How efficient is it? Are we having children waiting for a year or more to be assessed? Or is it that our referral system is bogged down because we don't have the personnel to deal with it? So even though we might have the best referral system going, there are some challenges because we are unable to meet the needs of all the children, right? Who may be referred and so on. What is the referral system like at the classroom level versus at the ministries level? Can we start with an intervention program, an identification program at the school first, referral, and then we take it from there to call in the ministry personnel, the district personnel, and so on. So we have to consider all of these. Now, in relation to identification, intervention, and placement, we have some other strategies that we want to just share with you quickly, and then we can ask some questions. Dion, next slide. So we spoke about the policy goal, and when we talk about inclusion in general education, we're saying it must aim to address the underachievement of all vulnerable groups without discrimination based on disabilities, varying socioeconomic status. We do know that some children whose family are below the poverty line may have a lot of challenges sending their children to school regularly, and also to ensure that their nutrition is right for them to be able to stay up in school, participate, and so on. We need not to discriminate based on gender. Are we actually having a girl-friendly school, and so the boys are having a harder time? Is there discrimination against girls for whatever reason? Your indigenous origin, your cultural identity, your ethnicity, your religion, language that you speak. Is your first language French Creole? So it's difficult for you to make that transition to school language, which is a standard St. Lucian English. Is your locale a problem? Are you in deep rural, inner city communities and services are not reaching you? You're being discriminated against. And other learners who might be migrants, displaced, or refugee populations living in St. Lucia. So we're saying no discrimination based on all of these and any other little vulnerability you may have as a result of your status. All learners must have access to quality and equitable, inclusive education with their peers and in their communities at all levels, whether it's early childhood, primary, secondary, and tertiary. But bear in mind that little caveat that says, if this is not the best placement for you at this time, then you must be in a special school or a special class where your needs may best be met there. All right? We spoke about free and compulsory education already, and the early identification system to deal with screening, placement, intervention, and support needs of learners at the earliest stage. We need to look at the Department of Education. Is it that we are collaborating enough with other ministries responsible for youth, equity, health, and gender affairs, for example, and third sector organizations to establish a long-term, multi-level policy framework for implementing quality, inclusive, and equitable education in schools? Okay. Any questions at this point before we go on to the next policy goal?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun. I know we're looking at the policy, but did we set out a legal framework? My saying that is, from my experience, from what I know, subject to correction, our parents tend to be in denial. I'm talking about those who are physically. They are in denial when we tell them that they need to go to do the test and move forward, so on with the testing. They are in denial, and they only really do it when the child is at grade 6. And there is nothing that the teacher or the principal or even the EO can do if they are not ready to do it. My question is, although we're looking at a policy, but did we have a legal framework to help us in that direction?
Okay, so the policy would speak to that, and also the Education Act, because parents have the right to appeal a decision, and for some kind of group to listen to what the parents' objection may very well be. However, at the end of the day, the state also has a right to ensure that the child is getting the best possible education that it can afford to have that child receive. So it's about, it's within the law, that legal framework will state the extent to which a parent may appeal, and that appeal, that parent may lose that appeal because what they is seeking, if none at all, may not be a regulation to assist parents and also the state to ensure that the child is at the center of all of this, and not necessarily the parent who may be thinking that I don't want my child to be in a special school or a special class or even general education, because I think the child should be in a special school. But the parent has a right to be heard, and the state also has a right to be heard, and that is and an amicable decision is derived. Because remember now, you also have, for example, school attendance officers who can take a parent to court who, for no good reason, is not sending the child to school, and the state can rule on that. So in the same way, we're asking for that, because what we're presenting now, when it moves from here to policy, it becomes legislated down the road to say, okay, this is what, in the same way the Education Act had to go through the various phases for it to be accepted, and for the ministry lawyers to take it to the next step, to have it go through Parliament and all of that. So most definitely that is being considered. Any other question?
Oh, Joan, if I may interject.
Yes, go right ahead.
In reference to Mr. Daniel's query, the Education Act is currently under revision, and there is significant consideration regarding the policy goals and the policy statements that are presented in this under this particular consultancy. The Education Quality Improvement Project team, we did have the two consultant firms dialoguing with each other to ensure that the revisions to the Education Act do speak to enhancements for provisioning or enhancements for special education within St. Lucia's education sector. And of course, as the consultants do develop this special education needs policy, it is very much informed by the proposed amendments to St. Lucia's Education Act. So there is some alignment and streamlining that is going on in the background.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Anybody else in terms of content, anything you want to have clarified? If not, then I will move on to the next overall policy goal. So we spoke about organizational structures. The policy goal, policy and strategies describe how the support structures at all levels will be organized to enable schools to effectively implement inclusive education. Now, our schools are general education schools, and the curriculum designed for children who are supposed to gain a year in a year, yes? And so oftentimes it's called the one-size-fits-all approach. How do we make our schools become truly inclusive, and how do we enable them to become that way? So we're going to have to look at financing, monitoring, and evaluation. They need to be financed to ensure that they are getting the right kind of materials, equipment, qualified teachers, and so on within the school setting to assist to make the structure sound enough for them to be successful. So general education schools must be transformed to inclusive schools. How do we do that? What organizational structure do we put in place to ensure that that happens? How does a principal and the teachers function in such a school? It's a little different. So no, it's not that different. Children are there. The difference is that we're going to structure it in a way so that all children, that their needs will be met, and not just necessarily those who fit nicely into the design curriculum. Post-secondary education, what structure do we need to enhance post-secondary education so these youngsters may become citizens of St. Lucia who are able to contribute and to take care of themselves, and do so in a way that they are self-sufficient while contributing to the development of their country. Then we also need to put what are the structures currently in place for special schools. Should we enhance them? Maybe we have to look at the provisions made. Not maybe, we have to look at the provisions that they have within the school setting. Are they appropriate enough? What else? What other kind of support do they need? Inclusive special units. There are some schools that may have a unit, a special class. What kind of structure must be in place to ensure that they are successful at what they do? How do we get the ministries of education, health and social welfare, and others involved so that we have a more comprehensive approach? Because some children, when they are very young, they are taken care of by the Ministry of Health. So from birth, the Ministry of Health identifies some issues. And then the Ministry of Education does not know that because the information was not transmitted to the Ministry of Education to say, okay, from birth, we know this child has a physical, maybe cleft palate, maybe clubfoot, maybe cerebral palsy, whatever the disability may be that has been recognized from birth. And yet still, the Ministry of Education didn't know that, but maybe social welfare knows because they may be supporting the family by way of a wheelchair or any other kinds of social contributions that are made through social welfare. Gender affairs may very well know and are involved. So we want to have more of a collaboration, interministerial collaboration, so that there isn't this situation where the Ministry of Education is unable to really do the comprehensive intervention, but health has some funding and already knows the case or needs to know about the case and so on. So we want to have a comprehensive approach, right? So organizational structures will have to be in place to ensure that all of what we're discussing here happens. All right, next slide, Dion. Okay, so interministerial cross-sectoral collaboration is necessary and it must be established between the Department of Education and ministries responsible for health, youth, gender affairs, and so on, as I shared with you. The operational remit, however, roles and functions of the special education unit must clearly ensure that assessment and intervention reach all students requiring services at each level of the education system. So a lot will be placed on the special ed unit within the Department of Education to continue to ensure and to expand to meet the needs of the special ed population and those children with disabilities. The Department of Education must provide long-term national level financial support and resources linked to a system-wide inclusive education strategies and establishes systems to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness and quality of inclusive education provided. So you can't just put something in place and leave it. You have to monitor it. You have to ensure that it is adequately financed. What are the line items in the budget that you need to have apart from a big budget for an overall budget for education? What are some of the line items there? Monitoring procedures must be well established to ensure that inequalities in access to educational resources and services nationally and at the district level are addressed at the organizational level. So these are some of the strategic objectives linked to the policy goal. Any question before I go on to the third one? Are you following well, understanding well, no issues, concerns, clarifications?
Oh,
ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Miss Emmanuel. Go ahead.
There is one question online which speaks to why isn't the information that you have presented, I'm assuming the data that you have presented, why is this not captured in St. Lucia's census? This question, of course, may be beyond your purview, but hopefully with this policy being formulated and the relevant enhancements to St. Lucia's Education Act, there would now be enhanced provisioning and statistical reporting as it pertains to the special education needs sector of St. Lucia.
In fact, Edith, we have made very specific recommendations about what statistics needs to be captured, specifically relating to accommodations and being able to report those children who have received accommodations at the CSEC level in terms of what the performance outcomes are. So we can actually see whether or not the accommodations are providing a benefit for these children. At this point, we don't know. So there are quite a bit of specific stats that we've asked for in the report to be included in the collection of data.
Yes, and we are very pleased that the consultant firm did make those recommendations. And so hopefully once this policy is formalized and ratified by the government of St. Lucia, we could have that networking with the Central Statistics Office in terms of their reporting regarding St. Lucia's advancements or progression annually.
Thank you so much for that. Anybody else before we move on? Okay, Dion, go to the next one. Okay. Curricular adaptations and modifications, because it can't be business as usual. The Chief Education Officer will institute programs promoting equity and quality, inclusive education that will ensure that the varying needs of learners will be facilitated through curricular accommodations, modifications and adaptations, and adaptive and assistive technology, which will allow all children to optimize their potential. Now, St. Lucia led the way in the region, I must say, in terms of looking at the curriculum as it is right now and making some adaptations and modifications that we assisted with to ensure that there is a tiered level of understanding and the way in which we do things. So whereas the objectives might very well be the same, what is happening is that we now have to look at different activities and the way in which we assess children, to look at the different levels of the learners and the different modalities in which people learn. So are we catering to learners who are strong visual learners, strong auditory learners, strong kinesthetic tactile learners. They learn by touching and working with manipulatives and so on. Are we catering to the various needs that human beings have, and not just simply talking to children and expecting them to get it by just sharing information in the traditional chalk and talk way? So those are things that we are advocating. So we have to look at the curricula from kindergarten all the way to Form 5. Are we catering to the needs of all the different learners, groups of learners within a general education classroom, or in a special class, or in a special school, right? Because they vary too, wherever they are. We have to look at the pre-service teacher training programs. Are those programs adequately preparing our teachers to go out there and teach children with varying needs, or are we training them to teach straight down the middle? Yeah, the one-size-fits-all approach that we spoke about. So are they able to deal with learners who are well ahead of themselves, or learners who may be struggling with the general curriculum? We need to look at the in-service teacher training programs, because if you're going to have this happening and you're going to have inclusive schools, which we already have, how equipped are our teachers in these classrooms? How equipped are they to provide for these children's needs? When we do our research and we talk with teachers, they did claim that they are not as prepared as they would love to. They have received some training, but they believe that they should have more comprehensive ongoing training so that they can be in a better position to work with children with varying needs. We want to look at the universal design for learning. What is that all about? It looks at differentiated instruction, responding to the different types of intervention necessary to make children maximize their potential. We have to look at assessment accommodations. CSEC will give you a reader if there's a proper report that says you need a reader. It will give you a writer if you need a writer. You can get various kinds of modifications, extended time, national exams, that's happening. But at the school level, is that happening? Are we catering to the needs of our children who need some assessment accommodation? Or are they expected to sit with all the children and do the same exam in the same time? Whereas if they did get a little extra time, or with some other kind of approved assistance, the results, the outcome may be much better. Next slide, thanks. Okay, what are some of the objectives linked to that? Maybe some of our children who are in the general education classroom who are visually impaired may need Braille, alternative scripts, augmentative and alternative modes of learnings, means and formats of communication such as sign language, orientation and mobility skills. How do they get around the compound? Where are their classes located? And facilitating peer support and mentoring in schools. The Department of Education will provide curricula that are adapted and modified for use with learners with SEND who are in inclusive and special education classrooms. Yes, one-size-fits-all approach has to go. A range of placement options will be provided in the least restrictive environment, most suitable educational arrangement. We spoke about that, but it will surface throughout, because placement is a very important aspect of what we're doing. So based on what the assessment results say, we'll decide, your specialist will decide, where do you go from the least restrictive, which is a general education classroom, to a special education classroom? There are some children who are in hospitals. What services do we provide for them? Some who may be incarcerated or in special homes because they may have been in conflict with the law. How do we continue to educate them, and so on? A mechanism will be developed to guide the transition across phases and levels of education. Extremely important. Career counselors and transition officers will be provided alongside school personnel to support learners and employers regarding school to work transition, training, and employment possibilities. And 3.6, universal design for learning approaches will be outlining school strategic plans to show how this will be used to provide a variety of teaching methods and that give all learners equal opportunities to maximize their potential. Okay, so we have dealt with curricular adaptations and modifications, question and answers again. And then after this, we're going to turn over to Kathy, who will take you through the other three. Any questions or comments?
Hi, Joan. I have shared with you and Dion 2 questions raised online.
Yes.
So if you could read this out to the audience, and I suppose you and your team can respond.
Okay, so the first question is, can the school make some adjustments in order to accommodate these students rather than, excuse me, putting them in a special school? Joan, that's the first question.
Can the school make some adjustments? This is what this whole process is about. To what extent the learner, if we go back to the very first slide that was shared, Dion, that had to do with, can you go back a little bit for me? To access.
Sure, yes.
Let's share that one. Go back. Go back. Right.
I think this is it.
Right, this is the one. In fact, go to the next one. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Right here. So all learners will have access, right? We spoke about the fact that we must ensure, I think it was the one before, but it's okay. I speak to it. We must ensure that once we identify children with special needs and disabilities, that every effort is made to include that child in general education and the services brought to that child. However, if it is not in the best interest of that child to be in general education, let's say for argument's sake, this child is totally nonverbal, is unable to control his or her, is in Pampers, cannot walk, cannot speak, make loud noises, had self-injurious behaviors, various kinds of things that's happening to this one child that may not be in this child's best interest to be in general ed because his or her own education may not be appropriately met in a general education classroom. In addition to that, this child's complicated disability may actually affect how the other children learn, because there are some children who may be into head banging and loud noises. And so the children will not be able to focus, and the teacher may not be able to go on with the class if that is happening. So maybe the best placement of this child is in a special school, and maybe with some intervention may actually be able to reintegrate it, depending on the extent to which these things are managed and are under control. There are some children on the autism spectrum who may have difficulty fitting into general ed class because of some of these things I'm sharing with you. There may also be children who are truly attention deficit hyperactivity disabilities that they may have. And these children may not be able to focus in a general ed. So once we get them to a level that they are best able to be reintegrated, that should happen. But for all intents and purposes, we're saying we don't have to have children in separate schools, but we can't get rid of a separate special school, because some children, that's the very best option for them to be in at the point at which they were assessed and needing an intervention. Yeah. All right. Question 2, based on these policies, will there be provisions made to educate parents about their child's educational needs and accommodations if needed? Absolutely on point. excellent question. Parents have to go through parent education program. We heard earlier that some parents are in denial. So true. Yes. And so part of getting them to accept and to understand and to appreciate is to educate them about what is happening to their child and what are the state's options for the best education for this child to get the parent on board. We need parents as advocates for their children to put the pressure on to ensure that their children's needs are being met. So parent advocacy groups, extremely important, but it must be driven by education so that they understand what is happening to their child, so that they understand that I have 5 children and I am making, because I'm I'm really very poor. I can't afford to send all 5 to school. They're school age. I can't afford to send all 5 every day. So I'm sending the one I think that's the brightest might go to school every day, because that child might be the one who's going to take us out of poverty. That's my reasoning. Then this little one will seem so bright. So I'm going to send this one 1 day, 2 days, or maybe not at all. So there's a problem in this home. What are the services necessary and the education that that parent needs to know and the social welfare services to kick in to help this parent to ensure that all 5 children are in school every single day? What is necessary for that to happen? So there's a lot of education at different levels that must take place for our parents so that they're totally, fully on board. Thank you.
There's another question, and it's the parent. Someone is asking if a child has cleft palate, how would that be dealt with in a school setting and in a classroom? How would that be dealt with?
Cleft palate usually needs a speech therapist. Usually has a speech impediment. Some cleft palate children may actually be gifted and talented. Are we going to put that child in a special school because of the cleft palate and we're not sometimes able to understand very well what that child is saying? That child may very well fit into an inclusive setting with speech and language intervention programs and a teacher who is trained to assist, or someone within the school setting to assist that child during that child may actually be able to communicate better in writing. Yes, but if that cleft palate situation is only one of several other concerns, if it is linked to other conditions that's creating problems for the child, we have to look at the best placement. But if it's just cleft palate and there's a difficulty understanding the child, that should not mean that that child is definitely a special class situation. But each child must be assessed and a decision made by a qualified team of experts. Just like a child with lisp or a child who is stuttering. Yes, a child who is stuttering may not be placed in a special ed situation if the only thing that is happening to the child is that the child is stuttering. And so we have to be very careful when we decide who needs what placement should a child have based on the presenting situations that we are able to assess and to diagnose what the challenge is and the appropriate placement made for that child. Okay, we can move on, dear. So we're going to
there's a comment here, and the comment reads, I fully support the need for EIS, which should mandate the transition required at each learning phase and level of education.
Thank you for that. It's definitely in what we are recommending. So thanks for the thumbs up.
I think this is where you take it from, Kathy. Okay, someone has asked, please expand on and give examples of referral systems.
Is that a question for me? What did you say?
Yes, please expand on and give examples of referral systems.
Okay, so referral system, usually it starts somewhere with a suspicion that a child has a problem. It may start from the parent can make a referral, a teacher can make a referral, a community member can make a referral, and so on. So we have the first phase would be a system whereby we allow for referrals. So we may need special kinds of forms and how do we go about identifying why we suspect that there is a challenge? A teacher may complete a referral form to say, I notice that this child is regularly absent from school. The child is reading significantly below grade and age and grade expectancy level, and so on. So we need a reason for a referral, right? From there, it goes to, usually we say, to the school. So you have your school internal referral system, and a school committee meets to look at the concerns that are being raised within the school or from the parent who may have come in to say, I believe my child has some kind of disability or some challenge, and that school team will meet and look at the different referrals that have come in, would make, now this is the ideal situation we're talking about, would make some recommendations. Could be one, I'm referring up to the district team or to the central team at the Ministry of Education, because I think based on what we're seeing here, we need the full team to come in or for the child to go to the full team for a comprehensive evaluation. That's one route. Then another route could be, let's try internally first. And these are our recommendations to the class teacher or to the parent, that we're going to do some interventions. We're going to do some minor assessments that we can do at our level. And then we're going to try an intervention first. Then we meet again if we get reports on the interventions that we're doing and those that are working. Kudos to everybody for where we are, calling the parents, say, okay, based on the individualized attention the child is getting, we don't think we need to bring in a team or send the child to Castries to have any further assessments done and so on. But coming out of that, there may very well be those children who must be listed for a comprehensive evaluation by a multidisciplinary team, meaning the clinical psychologist, special educator, maybe a speech and language pathologist, depending on what is happening, maybe a physiotherapist, maybe an occupational therapist, a social worker, a nurse, a doctor, whomever. The child must be a part of this team to dig deep to find out what are the needs of this child. So the referral system is really checkpoints at which we start with identification of the problem. Where do we refer this to? We have different levels of referral, starting with the school internal system, the district person responsible for special ed, the central special education unit at the Department of Education, and so on. So we look at that. Then the same team may decide on intervention and further referral or referral to a special school, but that can only and should only be done by a comprehensive multidisciplinary team. So it is really the various stages along which we identify early what the challenge is and what are the options that we have. So we line them up, ensure that everybody understands the various levels and what it takes to stay at the school level, the district level, and the central ministry level. Okay? So there's a whole diagram that is associated with that. All right.
There's another question here, and it may be that someone from the ministry wants to answer this. It says, does the bill speak to, that's the education bill, ensuring that relevant specialists are employed to assist both general ed and special ed teachers to help enhance the children's special needs?
Well, we are recommending that, so we hope it will go into law. So most definitely we have that as part of policy decisions to be made. So if anyone from the ministry wants to highlight that some more, I know Dale Shinjush is online. Would anybody like to speak to that question? But it is recommended, strongly recommended.
Yes, that is very much the case. The Education Act, of course, it is not really itemized because the Education Act has to be broad. So such specificity is not really evident, but there is provision within the Act for ensuring that the human resource capacity is adequate and is in accordance with the needs of the sector. The policy, however, is designed to really speak to specific matters that would more or less reinforce the Education Act. But at this stage, it's termed a bill. So the policy does strengthen on that. And again, as you have mentioned, Joan, you have spoken to that in your recommendations and in your proposed policy statements.
I think we can move on from here. Kathy?
Oh, before you do, there was someone who asked a question. I think Robertina Hollins said.
Okay. There's another question or there's a hand?
In the comment section.
Okay. I'm not sure. It says, shouldn't that be something that would have been mentioned to the parent during the child's 1 and 3 year assessment at the clinic? I'm not sure. Robertina, can you expand, please? What exactly are you making reference to? Is that reference to the referral system, or is this in relation to something else?
And good night, everybody. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, good night, everybody. I was referring to in assessing a child, in knowing whether a child would be fit in a regular school or in a special needs school, instead of when you go to the school to have the child registered, then you get to know that. Normally during clinic, well, during the child's first 3 years, you take your child to the clinic to get assessed. At that point, they should be able to tell you whether or not they notice anything different about your child. They normally do those little tests where they would ask them about different colors, to kick a ball, those little things. So I wanted to know, wouldn't that be assessed at that point instead of waiting until when they get into the public schools, public or private schools?
Okay, a lot of children will not show up with some of the challenges that you're speaking about so early. If it is there at that stage, most definitely the Ministry of Education should be very aware, and which is why we want the interministerial collaboration. Now, those children who show up early must get early intervention. There are those, however, whose disability or whose special education needs, let's take, for example, a child who is being molested and things are going okay, and then suddenly the work has started to suffer. That child is no longer interacting, no longer participating, and the child is in grade 6 or even in high school. Something has gone wrong in that child's life. The first time we're seeing it is at this late stage. And when that child is referred because work has fallen off, everything is not going right, and sometimes behavioral issues come in and everything, when you reach out to those parents or the child, you realize something traumatic has now happened. And the best way the child could let us know that something is wrong is through withdrawing or through becoming extremely boisterous and bothersome. So there are those children also whose learning problems, as I mentioned before, those problems are as a result of being vulnerable. So I'm a strong French Creole speaker. and I come into school and I'm still not understanding some of the language of school. Yeah. And so it becomes a challenge for me to transition from French Creole to English. And it is affecting how I learn. So it's a language influence that's taking place there that may not be picked up so early as well as it could be picked up. So there are things sometimes that children, we don't want doctors to tell children that they're going to grow out of things, because when that happens, our job gets harder. So as early as it is identified, definitely sharing of information and knowing what to do. But some of the disabilities, and like learning disabilities like dyslexia, oftentimes we don't know for sure until around age 6, 7 that this child is truly dyslexic.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
Because every single child, no matter how young.
Joan, can you hear me? I think there's a problem with your connection. Joan? Hello? There's a problem with your connection.
Reverse number. Early intervention. Nobody was here.
Yes, there was a problem with your connection. There was a problem with your connection. So I think earlier on, and I think the point was duly made though. So I'm gonna take Dale's raised hand.
Good evening, everybody. I thank Joan for that excellent explanation. She's on point in regard to the fact that there are conditions that emerge after the child enters the formal school system. But to the question that was asked, these services for children in the 0 to 4.5, 5 age range, these services currently exist. But as it stands now, without this policy, a lot is left to the parent. There is not a lot of established rules that would say to the parent, you are required to do this and that. And especially if your child is demonstrating certain issues, certain characteristics, you are required to do this and that. The other thing that the policy establishes is that stakeholder involvement. So it is not just the parent and just the doctor, but it brings in various other support agencies that can give guidance, support, assistance to the parent. It can include human services. It can include the SSDF with welfare resources. It can include medical personnel. It can include education personnel. As it stands right now, that is not well coordinated. It is left to everybody's, own set of rules and regulations, how that goes. But what the policy establishes is a mandate for coordinated activity and establishment of organized rules that would guide the parent in such a situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Dale.
On point, Mr. Sage is on point.
Do we have another question? If not, we're going to ask Kathy to take it from here, and she'll take us to the end of the presentation. Are you with us, Kathy?
Kathy is muted.
Oh, my apologies.
Okay,
my
go right
apologies. Yes, so I did say good evening again, ladies and gentlemen. Earlier on, Dr. Spencer Hernandez would have highlighted that one of the policy goals really focused on curricular adaptations and modifications, and specifically focused on promoting equity and quality inclusive education that would ensure that the varying needs of the SEND learners would be met. These adaptations are contingent upon having proper infrastructural provisions and the support system and mechanisms in place. So the main focus of the next policy goal would be establishing structures and systems that will provide reasonable accommodations in the form of adaptations, resources, and support systems, which will optimize learning opportunities and outcomes for special education needs and disabilities learners in an inclusive environment. So those support systems, some of which would have been mentioned earlier in the presentation, for example, would include accessible classrooms and buildings. And again, we're looking at the mainstream classrooms that would promote inclusivity. And of course, so for instance, here, we would be looking at whether or not the learners can actually access through ramps. Yes. We're looking at whether the playgrounds or the fun facilities that are at schools really cater to all learners and do not exclude certain learners because they may have certain special education needs or disabilities. So something perhaps persons may think is very trivial, but including all the learners, making provisions for them to have access to fun activities or to participate rather in fun activities is actually critical. Those systems and reasonable accommodations would also include adaptive technologies that would, of course, enhance the learning experience. We spoke earlier of applying the UDL, the Universal Design for Learning, and if that approach to instruction has to be applied, then certainly the various ICT tools which would facilitate the application of the UDL would definitely be necessary. So along with that, we are definitely looking at the provision of accessible learning materials. Certainly, every learner who presents as a special education needs learner must have the proper materials that would enhance and help him or her meet the educational objectives or learning objectives that would have been set for him or her. Again, if you have to apply UDL, there should be access to multiple means of engagement. So you're still looking at the different types of learners, identifying the different types of learners and providing materials that would cater to all of those learners who would present themselves in the classroom. Because a child who perhaps has a physical disability, or that physical disability does not take away from the fact that this learner would have a specific learning style that needs to be catered to if the learning objectives have to be met. And certainly there should be visual and auditory supports for all learners within the classroom. Again, if we are focusing on including learners, not excluding anyone, and ultimately meeting the objectives or meeting the learning objectives which have been set for those learners. Next slide, please. So certainly, in order to meet this main policy goal, which focuses on establishing all of those structures and systems that will provide those accommodations to our learners, certainly the recommendation is that the Department of Education will provide reasonable accommodation the individual requirements that will maximize, and the interesting term there is individual, the individual's requirements, or not interesting, but important term there is the term individual. So we're looking at not leaving any learner behind. Okay. And certainly we're looking at increasing the capacity of all schools to meet a greater diversity of educational needs so that learners may be supported within their local communities. And Dr. Joan would have mentioned this much earlier on, that there has to be there's this focus on accommodating the learner, whether within the general school setting and or within his or her community. And if the learner cannot be accommodated within those settings, then the learner would have to be accommodated at a special school or at an alternate location. Okay. Next slide, please. Do you have any questions or comments before I move on? Okay, well, certainly if you think of anything, then of course we would be happy to answer. Go ahead, Dion. Of course, again, I like to go back to the curricular adaptations and modifications. Really implementing those curricular adaptations and modifications really depend heavily on human resource provisions, because it is the human resources that are required to really be the faces of the implementation of the curricular adaptations. So the main policy goal here would be that the government of St. Lucia will undertake appropriate measures to improve the quantity and the quality of teachers, educational leaders, teacher educators, and specialists who support school communities in implementing inclusive education. You would note here the specific mention of all of the stakeholders here: teachers, educational leaders, teacher educators, and other specialists. So we're looking, excuse me, specifically at the composition of or providing the necessary personnel on those multidisciplinary assessment teams. Additionally, looking at having qualified teaching staff. You would have heard Dr. Joan making a reference to during the consultations, one of the gripes of teachers was that they themselves, or that there's a dearth of teaching staff who are qualified to deal with or to implement inclusive education, and to do so, with a certain degree of confidence. So one of the focus areas would be the provision of qualified teaching staff to include those with disabilities. That is critical also, in both in inclusive settings and in the special schools. Of course, for those persons who are currently functioning as both as special education teachers and also general teachers, there needs to be ongoing professional development so that persons they receive the requisite training that is so critical, so that they know how to deal with, how to cater to those learners who have special education needs or disabilities in the classroom. We would need to also have a focus or ensure that the sending unit is staffed with qualified education officers, because of course there needs to be that sort of oversight of what is happening in the system. So certainly having qualified education officers would assist in that regard. If we are going to put out this clarion call for the teachers in the classrooms to be trained, then certainly the persons training those teachers would themselves need to be qualified so that the preparation of in-service and pre-service teachers also to function effectively in inclusive classrooms is actually something that is well done, well planned for. Okay, so there needs to be that thrust and that focus on teacher educators to ensure that they are equipped with the skills which are supposed to be passed on to the teachers who have to function or who are being asked to function and to function at a certain level within an inclusive setting. Additionally, if having an inclusive school or a school that promotes inclusive education is part of the strategic plan of an institution or of a school, then certainly the individuals managing and leading leading those schools would have to be qualified to manage and to provide the necessary oversight to institutions or to schools which are supposed to be inclusive schools. So that those persons would have to ensure that all of the processes, all of the activities of their particular schools they actually reflect the characteristics or the requirements of inclusive education, and that there's the necessary monitoring even at the school level and evaluation at the school level to ensure that if we say that we are following or implementing the principles of inclusive education, that is actually happening. Next slide, please, Dion. So, if we are to realize success with this general policy goal, which looks at improving quantity and quality of teachers, when we look more specifically at the strategic objectives aligned with that policy goal, the recommendation is that the Department of Education will provide appropriately trained teachers who are qualified to teach learners with SEND in inclusive classrooms. Additionally, that department will recruit teaching staff from diverse backgrounds, inclusive of teachers with disabilities. So as excuse me, that will allow a sort of, kind of modeling of what the expectations are. Additionally, principals and teaching staff would need to be trained to meet the diverse educational needs of the learners. And of course, training pathways would need to be outlined to prepare specialists who support school communities to implement inclusive education. And of course, that would ensure that members of the multidisciplinary team are themselves qualified. An additional recommendation is that, and again, that is to deal with the gripe that teachers are saying they really feel that they need some assistance in terms of how to deal with the everyday, the day-to-day issues that having to deal with SEND learners would present. They really need that sort of grounding in implementation of and dealing with. So the recommendation is that the Department of Teacher Education and Educational Leadership at SALCC will offer compulsory SEND courses for all pre-service teachers to prepare them to teach all learners. So again, that goal of leaving no child behind. Yes. So as well, the policy is we're recommending that that SEND should be integrated into the teacher education programs. The final strategic objective here would be that the special education unit would be staffed with the requisite personnel or the necessary personnel to oversee the implementation of special education island-wide. Do you have any comments or questions before I move on?
Hi, Miss. Good evening. I have a comment or a concern. I really appreciate that the the report that we get from the MDT team, I find it to be very concise. It addresses a lot of things. And well, my concern is the recommendations. It is a lot. Now, I'm not saying it is too many recommendations, but let us look at the classroom where you will maybe have in that one classroom 5 children who receive reports from the team. And we get IEPs for each of those 5 children, in addition to the teacher having to cater to the other children in the class. I know that we don't have to implement all recommendations at any given time. We have to try for what works and whatever. But in terms of the teacher ability, the requirements that we want from the teacher in meeting the needs of all of the children and having to cater to each of those children's special needs, do you see that there will be a need for us to maybe on a case-by-case basis sometimes, depending on how many children we have in the class, need to reduce the student-teacher ratio based on the needs of the children?
I would certainly say so. And remember, there are learners based on their actual needs. They would need further assistance that perhaps the mainstream teacher cannot provide himself or herself. So certainly there would be that need for assistance. And again, like you said, on a case-by-case basis, there would in fact be learners who would need that sort of assistance. Certainly. Yes. I don't know if Jane or
May I ask a question?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Let's forget that the child has been diagnosed with a special need. And let's say I am a grade 3 teacher and I received 24 children from the grade 2 teacher. And when I assess them, so this is the beginning of grade 3, I find that some of them are reading at the pre-primer level, some are reading at the grade 1 level, some are at the grade 2 level. And this is a grade 3 class, right? The grade 2 level ones would be fine because that's where they should be. I'm going to introduce them to grade 3 work. Now, regardless of what I know about the child, do I just go straight ahead with the grade 3 curriculum because they're in grade 3, even though some of my readers are at pre-primer and so on? Or do I try to differentiate my instruction so that I have groups of learners within my classroom and try to meet their needs in the general education classroom? Now, that's linked also back to college, where we're saying at the college level, teachers must be exposed, must be trained to work with children of varying ability level, because no one classroom has everybody functioning at the same level. So even though you may have 5 IEPs, one might look and see that there are commonalities. And sometimes some of the children may not need help in a particular area. Let's say it's reading is the main problem, but the child's math skills are normal and quite fine or even above average. Or depending on what the child's needs, those needs are, we would design a program to help. Because as a teacher, I'm responsible for everybody in the class. But services to assist me must be available. Maybe a pathway coach, maybe someone who knows this more than I, so that I can be guided as to the best way to implement. But certainly one of my options is not to ignore the presence of those who are not functioning at the level that they should be when I receive them September morning. But services must be provided to assist the classroom teacher to understand and implement help in a way that sometimes it's really grouping for.
Thank you so much, Joan. I see that there's a... Oh, are you still speaking?
There are times when we have one kid all the way out on the limb. And when we look at it, we maybe.
Knock it out. I have one more to do.
Go ahead. I think because I'm using my phone as a hotspot, whenever a call is coming in, that's the problem. But you can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, John. I see there's a hand up from Irvin Smith.
Yes. There are also some comments online. Go ahead, Mr. Smith. Yes.
Yes, I heard the principal a while ago, I believe, if I got the voice correctly. She was going along in a direction that I thought, I thought she was going in a direction that my mind was. I was just asking, she spoke about reducing the student ratio. I was thinking more along the lines of, on a case-by-case basis, should a student need a teacher aide in the class? What provisions or recommendations have been made for that? Because it's a big challenge for the schools when we have some children who require that support that is not readily available. And if the parents are not able to afford, then it becomes a big issue and the children really and truly do suffer. So anything on that?
Yes, Mr. Smith, yes. The policy does cover, or one of the recommendations is the provision of aids to students. Joan or Dion, care to elaborate?
Yeah.
Or add anything?
There are times.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are times when I think even now where a teacher's aide is present, or coaches, persons who are special educators are deployed in quite a few of your classrooms. I was really shocked, pleasantly surprised to see how many, maybe not all fully qualified, but to see how many special educators are deployed all over St. Lucia to assist classroom teachers with the implementation of identification of some of the challenges and implementation of some of the strategies to work with them. So within the system as is now, there are persons, maybe not enough, but I can tell you, we're ahead of many of us in terms of the numbers. What needs to happen is to ramp up the qualifications of some of these persons, but they are actually provided, and we're advocating that more be done in that area. And also with teacher training, you're going in-service training, you're going to find teachers are better equipped to deal with children who who are not fitting the curricula exactly the way how we would have liked it.
Was that something in the chat? Trying to check.
Yes, I think there are a number of comments here. There's one comment that says, I think we can take this at the end. So all schools will not be inclusive schools. There's another question regarding the timeline for these changes to be implemented. And there's a comment that says, I must say, very good St. Lucia. I'm amazed by your new policies in the educational system, as it is provided every child with an opportunity to be successful. Most importantly, remove limitations and inequalities. Very good. Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Sejus has responded to a question, I believe. And here's a parent speaking from observation and not maybe factual. This sounds good on paper, but in fact does not work. Sounds like the minimum standards program where the student do the exam, but not the result, but the results are not used. I think, Edith, would you like to respond to that?
Sure, Dion. I do understand the parents' concern. And the Ministry of Education is committing, I would like to state, is committing to attempting to do this differently. Again, this policy, the goal of this policy is to have it ratified by the government of St. Lucia. And having the government's backing and having this policy enshrined, then it really allows for greater accountability to be developed within the education system. And where you have accountability, I would assume and I would hope that the mechanisms would be put in place to ensure that this does not just sound good on paper, but that this policy is actioned and really successfully implemented. I would like to add that the consultant team, there is discussion as to having an implementers workshop. Well, the initial timeline was supposed to have been towards the end of this month, but this has been pushed back probably into March. So there will be an implementers workshop where the key stakeholders will be brought together to really determine how the ministry and the relevant stakeholders across the system and within the public service, as well as other relevant agencies, as to how these parties can come together in the interest of ensuring that this policy, as you mentioned, Miss, does not just remain one that sounds good on paper, but is successfully implemented. But again, you do have a very valid concern based on historical patterns.
Yes, certainly. And thank you so much for sharing that, Miss. Yeah. Would anybody else care to comment or ask a question?
Oh, I'm seeing one parent ask the question, Laurie Charles.
I would like to know what's going to be done. Oh, I'm speaking about my daughter. She would like to read and would like to know what's going to be done about that, or asking how can she be helped, please. So she's asking how the policy would speak to assisting her daughter with reading. Certainly if your daughter is goes through the requisite assessment, Miss, I'm certain that a plan of action will be put in place for her. Would anybody else care to add?
Would it be possible? Oh, sorry, Joan. Oh, well, yes. Before you give your expert statements, Joan, is it possible for the parents to also share her details? So hopefully a special need expert on this call may be able to liaise with you thereafter. Because again, if this is inclusion, we really want to help every child. And if your child has this little challenge, then I'm sure that the relevant parties on this call would be happy to assist you. But you could go ahead, Joan.
Okay. Mom, the first thing, if you have recognized that she has a reading problem, she should be, as the system is now, she should be referred for testing, and based on the test results, a program of intervention will be developed for her. Now, we do know that one of the limitations of that sometimes is a long waiting list. And with that long list, sometimes it doesn't happen immediately. But I would think that you need to act immediately. And try and get those services in place. Dale Sanjusi is online. He can give you further information to help you with your daughter. But thanks for coming out and sharing with us.
Oh, Mr. Sagist, but if she is unavailable or to provide her contact details, you could always contact the special education unit. Oh, there it is.
Oh, yes.
And I noticed that one parent did speak to the matter of stigmatization. Hopefully with this policy being implemented and ratified by the government of St. Lucia, we would have some redress and have the matter of stigmatization dealt with across the system.
Very, very, very good point.
A quick story to this too. I'm a parent listening, right? Based on what the parent said about the debates about stigmatization. How can Ministry of Education stop the stigmatization being happening to persons of disability? Because most times as a parent, I firmly believe stigmatization for disability or persons with disability starts with Ministry of Education. Because when we as parents, we come to them and ask for assistance, they don't give it to us. So the head is always the problem. Without the head, the body does not move. So I believe the stigmatization starts from Ministry of Education. So I really want to know, how can it be stopped? What is the necessary measures that will be taken to stop the stigmatization, or yes, to stop stigmatization among persons with disability? Because I firmly believe that's where it starts. Because we as parents, we come to you and we ask for assistance and we don't get it. We feel left out. We feel like as if sometimes even when you call the office, you get some rude responses, or you get some nasty attitudes, or they would, some of the how you call it, the secretaries would say the supervisor is not there. All of these things, we as parents, we take records of it and we feel as if we let our children down. So I really want to know, how can it stop, or what are the policies put in place to stop the stigmatization among persons with disability? That is I'm listening, I'm a parent.
And
June, if I may, sorry.
I was just thanking the parent for sharing her concern in that regard, and just to highlight the need for a lot of sensitization and really making persons more aware of the need to be, more tolerant and so on. But Edith, you can go on.
Just to say that the parents' concerns are maybe well placed. We do appreciate your frank statements. And of course, the Ministry of Education is cognizant that there has been a lack of due attention to this sector. And bearing this in mind, and given that the Ministry of Education is again committed to ensuring that all of our students have a fair opportunity, significant efforts are being made at this time to ensure that the issues of stigmatization and the inadequate care for students and their families with special education needs, that is adequately addressed. So we do have the policy that we have presented to you. This draft policy is designed to develop accountability across the system and have the relevant supports and structures in place. This is one huge step the ministry has taken, and this ultimately is to be ratified by the government of St. Lucia. We also have the Draft Education Act that is currently under revision. The Act does speak quite strongly in terms of having statements and protections put in place for persons with special education needs, parents and family members. And we also have under the Education Quality Improvement Project. This project has invested quite extensively in resourcing special education needs schools across the island and giving supports to parents and family members of children with special education needs. This, of course, is just a drop in the bucket, but the Ministry of Education is committed to continuing its investments in this regard. We also have the OECS Education Pool Project. You also have investments being made under this initiative as well regarding addressing the needs of the special education needs sector, and of course, strengthening or reducing, I should say, the stigmatization that you speak to. We do hope that over time we would have greater awareness, greater sensitization, and of course, persons will come to accept and recognize the potential of children and the families with special education needs. So we are sorry that you've gone through this.
Sorry to cut you short, but I'm a firm believer of policy making, or having policies to run the process, so the process can go smoothly. But what about the school facility, right? The school facility is supposed to be in a conducive manner so that learning can be conducive as well. So now then, none of the schools on island, the only school probably is Lady Gordon. What about the school, the facility, the school building? How or what policy is there, or what policy was put in place to improve the school facility? Because all special schools, and I'm talking about special schools, not the schools where inclusion can happen at. We're talking about the special schools where inclusion is already taken place. There's a diverse amount of persons with disability at the school. So what's about about the building. What is the policy for the school building or the schools building to make learning a better and safer environment for the children? Because our facilities are lacking, and they're lacking big lack. So I really want to know, as a parent, I want to know what are the policies for the school building. What policy is there to enhance the school or the safety of the children while they're at school? So I want to know that, and I really want the principals to talk about that too, because most times I see that they hold back and then they don't talk about the structure of the school, where really and truly the structure is the biggest policy that should be there, because the safety and well-being of the children are important, and for learning to be comfortable, or for them to learn, they must be comfortable in the facility to learn. So I really want to know, what is the policy for the buildings, the special schools, the policy for these things? Thank you, I'm listening.
Very valid points, very valid concerns, very valid questions. Again, the Ministry of Education does speak to the necessary enhancements that are required in the proposed revised Act, Education Act, that is underway. This current policy does speak to the need for the proper infrastructure and supports. I think earlier Ms. Depredin did speak to that aspect of it. And I must say, or I must add also, under the Education Quality Improvement Project, we were mandated to develop designs, construction designs, for two of the special needs schools, the NATA and the Viewfort Special Education Needs Facility. So the Ministry of Education is very much cognizant of the need to improve the supports and the infrastructure of those institutions. It is unfortunate that it has taken so long, and well, I should say, but the ministry is attempting to resolve this problem as expeditiously as is possible. But rest assured that a lot has been done and is being done in the background to really address the needs of this sector and ensure that the students are not disadvantaged, but are given a fair opportunity to perform and to excel within a very comfortable learning environment.
I just find that it is not fast enough. That is my problem.
Agreed, but we do ask that you indulge and you bear some patience with us through this process. But of course, your statement is quite valid, your concern is quite valid, and the ministry will continue to enhance its provisioning for special education needs students across the sector.
Thank you for that really comprehensive response, Ms. Emmanuel. Would anybody else care to add a comment or have a question? Okay, if not, I would turn things back over to Dr. Kerr. Dion?
Kathy, are you going ahead with the stakeholder involvement?
Oh, yes.
Please, thank you.
Okay, sure. Certainly. Okay, so another focus of the policy is stakeholder involvement. Now, more specifically, the policy goal is that a framework that will identify various stakeholders and their specific roles, that the specific roles that they will play, and the strategies that will be used to engage them to support the implementation of special and inclusive education will be established. So that framework is really, really necessary to pull all stakeholders together and to ensure that all stakeholders understand their specific roles, understand what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to function, all in an effort to ensure that the special education and inclusive education policy is or will in fact be effective. So the identified stakeholders are, of course, certainly the parents and guardians of learners with SEND needs. And just like the parents we've heard speaking out this evening, certainly your voices are of utmost value and your voices need to be heard because you are really important stakeholders within this process. Certainly, another set of stakeholders would be the ministries of education, health, and social welfare, or any other ministries such as the justice ministries that deal with some aspect of young people's lives or the lives of young persons. They too would be critical stakeholders of this process. School and home communities, of course, the private sector, non-profit and non-government organizations certainly have to have their voices heard throughout this process. And of course, we have to, we can't forget those various international organizations from whom the direction is taken in those things. Next slide, please. So in order to realize this overall goal, the specific strategic objectives would be the full involvement of the families of SEND learners in all educational processes and actions for inclusive education. Additionally, the strategies for awareness raising with all stakeholders would have to be outlined. All of the stakeholders in inclusive education. So that awareness raising, even with the issue that was brought up earlier when it came to stigmatization, this is really, really critical because the stakeholders of this process there's a really wide pool of stakeholders who have to all do their part in order for inclusive education to really be successful. Another strategic objective would be that strategies for the involvement of international organizations and the third sector would also have to be, of course, a focus. All right. And of course, again, like we've said earlier, that all of these stakeholders would have to understand what their roles are and how they can support the implementation of special and inclusive education. Next slide, John. Dion, sorry. Okay.
That's it.
So this is where I hand over to you. So thank you so much, ladies and gents, for your attention. Do you have any questions before I hand over to Dion? Do you have any questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you for your attention, and I hand over the proceedings to Dion.
Okay, I think if we have no more questions and no more comments, I can pass the baton back to Edith and to the district coordinator.
Oh, yes. I will close on behalf of EO Joseph, unless if you would like to say anything, Mrs. Joseph, then that would be absolutely fine. But I would really like to thank everyone for participating in this initial consultation. We do recognize the time constraints, and we are very appreciative of the fact that you have joined on to this and you have remained with us for the duration of this session. I would like to, of course, to state that these sessions continue tomorrow, as well as Wednesday and Thursday. Tomorrow we'll be meeting with districts 3 and 4, Wednesday districts 5 and 6, and Thursday districts 7 and 8. Following these initial consultations, the consultant team would probably regroup and look at how the proposed policy document can be further enhanced in the interest of satisfying the needs of the relevant stakeholders. The consultant team, once this policy document is approved by the relevant stakeholders, will then fly into St. Lucia to meet with the key stakeholders and, of course, execute the implementers training or implementers workshop with those relevant parties or relevant parties. So this is just the initial step. And of course, you have been very instrumental in that process by availing yourselves this evening and participating in the discussion. Every single contribution is well received. And of course, we do understand the frustrations that persons may have, and that too is very much well received. And we are committed to trying to remedy or address these frustrations as best as is feasible. But if there is nothing else, Mrs. Joseph, DO for District 1, would you like to say anything, perchance?
Good evening again. No, miss, you okay? We okay?
Okay, fantastic. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much to the Joint Board of Teacher Education team for the extreme effort that you have applied in putting this policy together, the draft, and for, of course, facilitating this week's consultations. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Team JBTE, and do have a good evening. Those of you who are driving home, please get home safely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.